The air in the art conservation lab hummed, a sterile symphony of filtered air and hushed anticipation. Fluorescent lights cast a cold, even glow on the assembled team, their faces illuminated by the ethereal shimmer emanating from the massive digital screen dominating the room. Before them, magnified to an almost absurd degree, was a scan of a portrait celebrated for centuries as a pinnacle of Renaissance artistry. But tonight it was more than just a masterpiece. It was a puzzle, a secret waiting to be unlocked. Dr. Evelyn Reed, her gaze unwavering, stood at the head of the group. Years of meticulous research had led to this moment, a culmination of countless hours spent poring over historical documents, analyzing paint pigments, and wrestling with the entrenched dogma of the art world. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of professional detachment, but beneath it, a tremor of excitement vibrated. A young technician, his fingers flying across the keyboard, adjusted the spectral analysis settings. The image on the screen shifted, colors blooming and receding like an aurora borealis. Then he stopped, his voice barely a whisper. "Doctor, I think we have something." He pointed to a seemingly innocuous area of the portrait, just to the left of the subject's elegantly rendered hand. To the untrained eye, it was nothing more than a slight imperfection, a subtle variation in the texture of the paint. But the spectral analysis revealed something far more profound. A faint, almost ghostly signature, hidden beneath layers of varnish and time. It wasn't a flaw. It was an alteration, a deliberate act of concealment. The implication was staggering. For centuries, the world had interpreted this portrait based on what was visible on the surface, accepting the artist's final composition as the definitive statement. But this hidden detail suggested otherwise, hinting at an original intention that had been deliberately suppressed. The antagonist in this story wasn't a person, but a pervasive, unchallenged narrative, a story that had, in its own way, betrayed both the artist and the subject. The visual impact of the revelation, even in its subtle form, was undeniable. It was as if a veil had been lifted, exposing a hidden layer of meaning that had remained dormant for centuries. Everything previously believed about the portrait, its subject's identity, the artist's motivations, even the historical context in which it was created, was now open to question. The comfortable certainty that had surrounded this iconic image was shattered, replaced by a bewildering sense of uncertainty. Dr. Reed, despite the seismic nature of the discovery, remained remarkably composed. Years of academic battles had taught her the importance of strategic calm. She knew that this single detail, this almost imperceptible anomaly, had the potential to send shockwaves through the art world, challenging established authorities and overturning long-held assumptions. Her mind raced, calculating the implications, anticipating the inevitable backlash, and formulating a plan to navigate the turbulent waters ahead. The initial consequence of this discovery was profound. It promised a fundamental shift in understanding, a rewriting of history that would challenge the very foundations of art historical scholarship. But the full extent of its impact remained veiled, hidden behind a wall of ingrained beliefs and institutional resistance. The truth, it seemed, had been buried for a reason, and unearthing it would be a long and arduous process. Time, like a relentless tide, eventually reveals what it tries to conceal, Dr. Reed murmured, her voice barely audible above the hum of the equipment. It was a phrase that had echoed in her mind throughout her years of research, a reminder that even the most carefully guarded secrets eventually find their way to the surface. The moment demanded action. The evidence needed to be meticulously documented, the findings rigorously verified, and the implications carefully considered. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but the potential rewards were immeasurable, a chance to finally understand the true story behind this enigmatic portrait, to restore the artist's original vision, and to correct a historical injustice that had persisted for far too long. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are watching from in the comments. The portrait, a breathtaking depiction of a noble woman from the Florentine Renaissance, hung prominently in the Uffizi Gallery. Its image was ubiquitous, gracing the covers of countless art history books and postcards. For generations, it had been a shining example of the era's artistic prowess and a testament to the sitter's supposed virtue and grace. Her serene expression, the delicate rendering of her silk gown, and the meticulously detailed background all contributed to a narrative of idealized beauty and aristocratic refinement. This was more than just a painting. It was a cultural artifact, a symbol of a bygone era, and a cornerstone of the art world's understanding of the Renaissance. The art world, much like any established society, possessed its own distinct country and neighborhood. Its borders were defined by prestigious institutions like the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the National Gallery. Within these hallowed halls resided the influential scholars, the celebrated curators, and the powerful critics who shaped the prevailing discourse. Their pronouncements carried immense weight, influencing museum acquisitions, academic curricula, and public opinion. The traditions of art history were deeply entrenched, passed down through generations of academics and practitioners. The connoisseur's eye, the meticulous study of provenance, and the adherence to established methodologies were all hallmarks of this exclusive world. Custom dictated how the portrait was displayed, studied, and appreciated. Guided tours highlighted its artistic merits, emphasizing the artist's mastery of technique and the sitter's embodiment of Renaissance ideals. Academic papers dissected its symbolism, tracing its influences and placing it within the broader context of art history. Public perception, carefully cultivated through exhibitions and publications, solidified its status as a masterpiece. The portrait was not merely an object of aesthetic appreciation, it was a historical document, a cultural icon, and a symbol of national pride. The routine surrounding the portrait was predictable and comforting. Scholars would meticulously examine its brushstrokes, comparing them to other works by the same artist. Historians would pore over archival records, searching for clues about the sitter's identity and social standing. Conservators would carefully monitor its condition, ensuring its preservation for future generations. The consensus surrounding its meaning was so strong that it rarely faced any serious challenge. The art world had grown accustomed to its presence, accepting its narrative as an immutable truth. Dr. Reed's social circle was initially shaped by this very environment. Her early mentors, esteemed professors at prestigious universities, instilled in her a deep respect for art history's established canon. Her peers, fellow graduate students, and young researchers shared her passion for the subject and her commitment to traditional methodologies. The academic environment, with its rigorous standards and its emphasis on established knowledge, reinforced these prevailing views. Dr. Reed, like many others, started within this system, absorbing its wisdom and accepting its authority. However, even within this seemingly harmonious world, initial tensions began to emerge. These were not overt conflicts or dramatic confrontations, but rather subtle, almost subconscious discomforts with certain aspects of the accepted narrative. Perhaps it was a nagging inconsistency in historical documents, a discrepancy between the portrait's depiction of the sitter and contemporary accounts of her personality. Or maybe it was a stylistic anomaly, a brushstroke or compositional element that never quite fit the prevailing theory about the artist's development. These tensions manifested as quiet whispers against a roaring chorus of established knowledge. They were the first, almost imperceptible cracks in the portrait's seemingly immutable identity. A fleeting sense of unease when lecturing on the portrait, a recurring question that couldn't be definitively answered, a lingering doubt that refused to be silenced. These were the seeds of a revolution, planted in the fertile ground of intellectual curiosity and nurtured by a relentless pursuit of truth. They were the subtle signals that something was amiss, that the accepted narrative was not as complete or as accurate as it seemed. The art world, with its deep-seated traditions and its powerful institutions, presented a formidable challenge to anyone who dared to question its established truths. The portrait's position was so deeply entrenched, its meaning so thoroughly ingrained, that even the slightest hint of dissent was met with skepticism and resistance. Dr. Reed, initially a product of this system, would soon find herself on a collision course with its most fundamental assumptions. The weight of history, the authority of tradition, and the inertia of established knowledge all stood in the way of her quest for a deeper, more truthful understanding of the portrait. It was a David versus Goliath battle, a lone researcher, armed with scientific tools and unwavering determination against the collective might of the art world. The roots of the portrait's long-standing interpretation ran deep, entwined with the very fabric of art history itself. Decades, even centuries of scholarship had built upon each other, creating a seemingly unshakable edifice of understanding. It was a testament to the power of collective knowledge, but also a cautionary tale about the potential for collective blindness. Art history, like any discipline, had its family habits. Narratives were passed down through generations of scholars, each adding their own layer of interpretation, reinforcing existing theories and often, inadvertently, solidifying biases. Early, influential analyses became canonical, their authors revered as titans of the field. These foundational texts were treated with almost religious deference, their conclusions rarely challenged, their assumptions seldom questioned. Subsequent generations, often eager to prove their own worth, tended to build upon these foundations rather than dismantling them for a fundamental reevaluation. This created a kind of intellectual inertia where the weight of tradition made it difficult to deviate from the established path. Within the hallowed halls of academia, old grievances simmered beneath the surface. There were instances where dissenting theories, alternative interpretations, or uncomfortable facts were quietly dismissed, marginalized, or even ridiculed by the dominant scholarly consensus. These forgotten papers, relegated to dusty archives, represented the road not taken, the paths unexplored. They were the whispers of doubt that were drowned out by the roar of established opinion. Some scholars, perhaps lacking the clout or the confidence to challenge the prevailing wisdom, harbored quiet reservations, their insights lost to the sands of time. These suppressed voices hinted at the cracks in the foundation, the inconsistencies that didn't quite fit the accepted narrative. Specific memories from the art historical record illustrated how certain interpretations gained traction, often for reasons that had little to do with objective analysis. Political expediency played a role, with interpretations sometimes tailored to align with the prevailing ideology of the time. Cultural trends also exerted their influence, shaping the lens through which the portrait was viewed. And, of course, there was the undeniable power of personality. A charismatic scholar with a gift for persuasive rhetoric could sway opinion and solidify their interpretation, even if the evidence was less than conclusive. The force of their conviction, combined with their institutional power, could effectively silence dissenting voices and cement their narrative as the accepted truth. These cracks, however, began much earlier than the current discovery. They existed as latent possibilities within the historical record, waiting for the right tools, the right mindset, and the right moment to be brought to light. A seemingly insignificant detail in a letter, a fleeting reference in a diary, a stylistic anomaly that defied easy categorization. These were the seeds of doubt that had been sown long ago, only to lie dormant until now. The researchers, with their advanced technology and their willingness to question everything, were finally able to cultivate those seeds and bring them to fruition. The accepted narrative, while perhaps well-intentioned, inadvertently created blind spots, preventing a more nuanced or truthful understanding of the portrait. Selective historical evidence was often employed, with scholars focusing on aspects that supported their preconceived notions while ignoring or downplaying contradictory information. A focus on certain stylistic elements, such as the subject's clothing or pose, overshadowed other potentially revealing details, such as the subtle nuances of their expression, or the symbolism embedded within the background. A lack of interdisciplinary approach further compounded the problem, with art historians often failing to draw upon insights from other fields, such as social history, cultural studies, or even scientific analysis. The portrait was studied in isolation, divorced from its broader context, leading to a skewed and incomplete understanding. The conflict, then, was not simply between competing interpretations, but between the inertia of established knowledge and the nascent, sometimes suppressed, pursuit of a deeper truth. It was the story of how a specific interpretation, through a complex interplay of factors, became an unchallenged truth, laying the groundwork for the eventual dramatic revelation that was about to unfold. The weight of history, the force of tradition, the power of personality, all conspired to obscure the truth until a new generation of researchers dared to question the very foundations of art historical understanding. And it was this willingness to challenge the status quo, to embrace new technologies, and to pursue the truth wherever it may lead, that ultimately paved the way for the discovery of the invisible detail that would change everything. This willingness to challenge the status quo, to embrace new technologies, and to pursue the truth wherever it may lead, ultimately paved the way for the discovery of the invisible detail that would change everything. But before that groundbreaking moment could arrive, the true meaning of the portrait had to endure a long, slow, and corrosive process of obscuration. Over centuries, a series of small, seemingly isolated episodes accumulated, each contributing to the gradual erosion of truth, layering misunderstanding upon misinterpretation until the original intent was buried deep beneath a mound of accepted wisdom. It was a testament to the insidious nature of historical accretion, where neglect and convenience could be just as potent as deliberate deception in twisting the narrative. One of the most disheartening aspects of this erosion lay in the broken promises that peppered the portrait's long history. There were numerous occasions when scholars, curators, or institutions, recognizing minor inconsistencies or feeling a vague sense of unease with the prevailing interpretations, pledged thorough re-examinations. These promises, often made with the best intentions, rarely materialized. Archival deep dives, promised to unearth new contextual evidence, were frequently postponed, underfunded, or simply forgotten amidst the relentless demands of museum operations and academic publishing cycles. Critical questions, once raised, were left unanswered, allowing the comfortable, albeit incomplete, narrative to persist unchallenged. Each unfulfilled commitment represented a lost opportunity, a chance for the truth to surface that was allowed to slip away, further cementing the portrait's misconstrued identity. The weight of these abandoned inquiries pressed down on the artwork, making it ever more difficult for future generations to discern its true voice. Compounding these failures were the painful silences that permeated the academic discourse surrounding the portrait. Any alternative theories, no matter how subtly hinted at in obscure papers or presented by less influential voices, were often met with a deafening quiet. Minor discrepancies in historical documents, stylistic anomalies that didn't quite align with the dominant school of thought, or even nascent scientific observations that hinted at underlying complexities were simply left unexamined. They became inconvenient truths, swept under the rug of scholarly consensus, deemed not significant enough to warrant further investigation or simply too disruptive to the established order. This academic silence was not an active suppression, but a passive form of neglect, a collective agreement to not look too closely at anything that might rock the boat. These unexamined facts and unaddressed questions formed invisible gaps in the narrative, allowing the accepted interpretation to solidify without the rigorous scrutiny it deserved. Then there were the more active, albeit often subtle forms of emotional aggression that stifled genuine inquiry. This wasn't about personal attacks, but rather the aggressive dismissal of new methodologies or technologies that threatened to challenge the status quo. When early forms of scientific analysis, even rudimentary ones, began to emerge, they were often met with skepticism, if not outright disdain. By traditional art historians, the resistance to scientific analysis, in favor of purely art historical or connoisseurship approaches, created an intellectual barrier. These traditionalists, deeply invested in their established methods and interpretations, viewed technological interventions as invasive, reductive, or somehow disrespectful to the intrinsic mystery and artistic genius of the work. They argued that art should be appreciated through the trained eye and the cultivated mind, not through sterile machines and cold data. This intellectual conservatism, though often cloaked in the guise of defending artistic integrity, inadvertently became a powerful force for maintaining the historical blind spots and preventing a more objective understanding of the portrait. Furthermore, subtle manipulative behaviors played a role in curating the narrative around the portrait. Institutions, driven by the need to maintain public interest, attract funding, or uphold their reputation, sometimes prioritized interpretations that were more palatable, more dramatic, or simply more familiar to the public. Influential figures within the art world might have subtly steered discussions, controlled access to the artwork for specific types of research, or framed exhibitions in a way that reinforced the existing interpretation, even when nascent doubts began to surface. This wasn't necessarily about fabricating lies, but rather about shaping the lens through which the portrait was viewed, emphasizing certain aspects while downplaying others, ensuring that the narrative remained consistent and unchallenging. The desire to present a clear, coherent story, rather than a complex, evolving truth, often led to the unwitting suppression of nuance and alternative perspectives. These cumulative actions, the broken promises, the painful silences, the academic resistance to new methods, and the subtle curation of the narrative, led to a gradual growth of disrespect, not towards the portrait itself, but towards the full, multifaceted truth it held. The integrity of its historical narrative was slowly compromised not by a single dramatic act, but by 1,000 incremental distortions. Each overlooked clue, each dismissed theory, each unfulfilled investigation chipped away at the portrait's authentic voice, replacing it with a constructed reality that, while widely accepted, lacked the true resonance of the artist's original intention. The portrait became a vessel for a narrative that served contemporary interests rather than a pure conduit to its own past. It is crucial to understand that this corrosive process was rarely driven by malicious intent. More often, it was a complex interplay of academic inertia, human bias, the limitations of past technologies, and the sheer difficulty of discerning truth across centuries. Scholars and institutions, working within the constraints of their time and knowledge, often genuinely believed they were upholding the portrait's legacy. Yet, the outcome was undeniably the same. The truth was incrementally distorted, obscured, and forgotten, leaving the portrait to tell a story that was only partially its own. This slow, almost imperceptible erosion created a profound historical debt, building a compelling case for why a dramatic reevaluation was not just possible, but absolutely necessary. It set the stage for Dr. Evelyn Reed and her team, equipped with cutting-edge tools and an unwavering commitment to uncover what had been lost, to finally intervene and begin the arduous process of reclaiming the portrait's true, unvarnished history. The willingness to challenge, to embrace, to pursue, these were the catalysts. Yet the path to revelation was far from smooth, marked instead by an escalating tide of scholarly conflict and mounting pressure that threatened to engulf the very researchers daring to seek the truth. The quiet whispers of doubt, once confined to the margins of academic discourse, began to crescendo into more vocal challenges. Dr. Evelyn Reed, along with her burgeoning team of interdisciplinary experts, found themselves at the forefront of this intellectual skirmish. What started as nuanced questions in obscure footnotes or private conversations rapidly transformed into vigorous debates waged across prestigious academic conferences, the pages of peer-reviewed journals, and specialized online forums dedicated to art historical inquiry. These were no longer polite disagreements. They were direct confrontations with deeply entrenched beliefs, often carrying high stakes for academic reputations, career trajectories, and the very funding streams that sustained scholarly pursuits. The discussions increased in intensity, fueled by the preliminary findings from Dr. Reed's laboratory. Each spectral analysis, each infrared reflectogram, each minute detail unearthed by their advanced imaging techniques chipped away at the monolithic edifice of the accepted narrative. Papers published by Reed's team, though meticulously footnoted and rigorously peer-reviewed, were met with a mixture of awe and fierce resistance. Traditionalists, those who had built their careers on the very interpretations now being questioned, viewed these technological interventions with suspicion, sometimes even disdain. They argued for the primacy of connoisseurship, the trained eye, and the weight of historical consensus over what they often dismissed as cold, soulless data that lacked the humanistic touch essential for understanding art. This pushback wasn't always overt. Often, it manifested as subtle social pressures designed to maintain the status quo. Silent judgments became a pervasive undercurrent in the academic world. Older, more established scholars, custodians of the very traditions Dr. Reed was challenging, cast a skeptical eye upon these new, technologically driven approaches. They viewed the invasive nature of multispectral imaging and X-ray fluorescence not as tools for deeper understanding, but as disrespectful intrusions into art's intrinsic mystery, stripping away its aura and reducing it to mere chemical compounds. This skepticism translated into subtle resistance that permeated various levels of institutional bureaucracy. Securing funding for innovative research that threatened to upend established narratives became increasingly difficult. Grant applications from Dr. Reed's team often faced prolonged scrutiny, with review committees raising questions about the necessity of such disruptive research when the portrait's meaning was, in their view, already definitively settled. Access to the portrait itself, for advanced non-invasive analysis, became a protracted battle, involving layers of curatorial permissions and institutional politics. Even the pace of peer review for papers proposing radical new interpretations seemed to slow, bogged down by an unusual number of revisions or outright rejections based on perceived methodological overreach or lack of traditional art historical context. Beyond the ivory towers, early leaks or hints of the researchers' groundbreaking work inevitably led to significant public scrutiny and media speculation. Tabloid headlines screamed about art history under attack, while more serious cultural commentators found themselves divided. Some passionately defended the traditional view, appealing to the public's sentimental attachment to the portrait's long-held story, framing any challenge as an assault on cultural heritage. Others, however, called for openness and a scientific approach, intrigued by the prospect of unlocking deeper truths. This created a tumultuous external environment, adding another layer of complexity and pressure to the already intense academic battle. The psychological environment for Dr. Reed and her team became heavy, almost suffocating. They faced the daunting task of challenging centuries of accepted wisdom, an undertaking that risked not only their immediate professional standing, but also potentially alienated powerful figures within their field, many of whom served on the very committees that controlled their future. The internal pressure within Dr. Reed's team was immense. Every hypothesis had to be rigorously tested, every piece of data meticulously cross-referenced. The fear of making even a minor mistake, of providing any ammunition to their detractors, loomed large. They understood the immense responsibility of potentially overturning a historical cornerstone, of rewriting narratives that had shaped public perception for generations. The weight of this responsibility pressed down on them, demanding absolute precision and unwavering dedication. Late nights blurred into early mornings, fueled by endless cups of coffee and an unyielding commitment to the scientific method. Discussions within the lab were intense, often heated, as they dissected every angle, every potential counterargument, ensuring their findings would be unassailable. Each member of the team felt the collective burden, the knowledge that their work would either be hailed as revolutionary or dismissed as a reckless academic folly. Dr. Reed, with her characteristic quiet resolve, bore the brunt of much of this pressure. She shielded her team where she could, navigating the treacherous waters of academic politics and media sensationalism, always with an eye on the ultimate goal, the truth. She understood that challenging an established truth, especially one so deeply woven into the cultural fabric, was rarely a smooth or easy process, regardless of the compelling nature of the evidence. It required not just intellectual brilliance, but also immense courage, resilience, and an almost defiant belief in the scientific process. This part of their journey was less about discovery and more about endurance, a testament to their conviction that the portrait held secrets worth fighting for, secrets that deserved to be brought into the light, even if it meant confronting the full force of tradition and inertia. The intellectual and emotional battle being waged was a crucible, forging their resolve and sharpening their focus, preparing them for the definitive revelation that lay just ahead. The willingness of a new generation of researchers to challenge the status quo, to embrace innovative technologies, and to pursue truth wherever it may lead ultimately paved the way for the discovery of the invisible detail that would change everything. Yet, this path was far from smooth. As Dr. Evelyn Reed and her team drew closer to the precipice of revelation, the resistance from the established art world, the entrenched antagonist of this narrative, intensified with a fierce, almost desperate energy. This was the pre-rupture phase, a period fraught with escalating tension, where the long-held interpretation committed more grave errors in its defense, digging its heels in deeper even as the ground beneath it began to crumble. The implacable actions taken by certain institutions and traditional scholars were disheartening. There was an outright refusal by some to acknowledge the validity of the new scientific methods, dismissing multispectral imaging and advanced chemical analyses as crude, mechanistic intrusions upon the sacred, intuitive realm of art history. Attempts were made to discredit the researchers' preliminary findings, not through counter-evidence, but often through ad hominem attacks, questioning Dr. Reed's motives or suggesting her team lacked a true appreciation for the aesthetic nuances of the Renaissance. Misrepresentation of their data, selective quotation, and outright denial became common tactics, creating a suffocating academic environment that sought to invalidate their work before it could fully mature. This dogmatic adherence to traditional, less objective methods persisted, rejecting technological advancements as soulless or irrelevant to artistic appreciation, clinging to an almost romanticized notion of connoisseurship that could not withstand the scrutiny of modern science. Beyond the academic skirmishes, there were subtle yet pervasive public relations campaigns. Influential figures within the established art world leveraged their platforms, giving interviews to prominent media outlets, penning eloquent articles in esteemed publications, all designed to reinforce the old narrative around the portrait. These efforts were carefully curated, often framing the traditional interpretation as a bastion of cultural heritage, implicitly undermining the new research as a dangerous, iconoclastic threat to established understanding. Carefully curated exhibitions were mounted, emphasizing the familiar story of the portrait, guiding public perception away from any whispers of doubt. The aim was clear: to sway public opinion and reinforce the old narrative, thereby creating a buffer against the inevitable shockwave of a new truth, hoping to mitigate its impact by preemptively discrediting its proponents. It was during this period that Dr. Reed and her team began to lose their last sources of patience. Armed with increasingly compelling preliminary data, their frustration mounted. The resistance they faced was not merely intellectual disagreement. It felt illogical, almost willfully blind to the accumulating evidence. Their dedication to objective truth, their meticulous methodology, and their growing body of findings clashed directly with the inertia of tradition, the comfort of the familiar, and the fear of professional upheaval. Sleepless nights were spent poring over scans, cross-referencing archival documents, and debating every minute detail, not just to strengthen their case, but to withstand the relentless barrage of skepticism and outright dismissal. The emotional toll was significant, but it also forged an unshakable resolve. This mounting pressure, both external and internal, pushed the researchers to a strategic decision. They would go all in. The time for cautious revelation and incremental data releases was over. They committed to the full, definitive analysis that would either prove their hypothesis beyond any shadow of a doubt or force them to retreat, their careers potentially in tatters. There was no turning back. Every resource, every shred of expertise, every ounce of their collective intellect would be poured into this final, conclusive phase of their investigation. It was a high-stakes gamble, but the truth, they believed, demanded nothing less. The atmosphere in the lab became charged with an almost palpable anticipation. It was clear to everyone involved, and indeed to the handful of trusted colleagues outside the immediate team, that something very big was about to happen. The air crackled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The final conclusive scientific analysis was not just another experiment. It was the crucible in which centuries of accepted wisdom would either be reaffirmed or shattered forever. The global art world, though largely unaware of the exact nature of the imminent revelation, sensed a shift, a growing unease that hinted at monumental change. The portrait, once a quiet sentinel of history, now seemed to hum with a restless energy, as if awaiting its own reawakening. The focus shifted entirely to the meticulous preparation for the definitive detection of the invisible detail. Advanced technology, previously considered cutting-edge, was pushed to its absolute limits. Specialized imaging equipment, custom-built for unprecedented spectral resolution, was calibrated with painstaking precision. The environmental controls in the conservation lab were tightened to an almost obsessive degree, ensuring no external variable could compromise the integrity of the scans. The methodology for this final phase was rehearsed repeatedly, every step documented, every potential anomaly accounted for. It was a ballet of scientific rigor, a symphony of precision, all orchestrated to capture the faint, elusive signature hidden beneath layers of time. The immense pressure on the research team was almost unbearable. Each technician, each art historian, each conservator knew the weight of their collective responsibility. A single misstep, a solitary error in judgment, could undermine years of work and allow the antagonist narrative to prevail. Dr. Reed, though outwardly calm, felt the constant hum of anxiety beneath her skin. She carried the burden of vindicating her team, of honoring the subtle clues that had whispered of a deeper truth for so long. The stakes were not just academic. They were historical. The truth of the portrait, the integrity of its message, and perhaps even the legacy of the artist hung in the balance, poised on the very edge of discovery. The moment arrived with a quiet solemnity, less a bang and more a profound, almost reverent hum of highly calibrated machinery coming to life. Dr. Reed stood beside the primary console, her gaze fixed on the pristine surface of the ancient portrait, now bathed in the ethereal glow of multispectral light. The lab was hushed, every technician and scientist holding their breath, their collective focus a tangible force. This was it, the culmination of years of doubt, decades of subtle clues, and centuries of misinterpretation. The advanced imaging systems, pushed to their absolute theoretical limits, began their meticulous sweep, probing beneath the visible surface, seeking the hidden truths entombed within the pigment and primer. The initial passes employed sophisticated infrared reflectography, a technique designed to penetrate the upper layers of paint and varnish, revealing the artist's preparatory drawings, known as underdrawings. On the large curved monitors that dominated the control room, intricate lines began to emerge, faint at first, then sharpening into undeniable clarity. The team watched, mesmerized, as the ghostly contours of an earlier composition materialized. This wasn't merely a preliminary sketch. It was a distinctly different foundational design for the subject's hands, their posture, and even the subtle curve of their lips. The accepted narrative always depicted the subject with a demure, almost melancholic grace, hands clasped gently. But the infrared revealed something else entirely. A more assertive, perhaps even defiant pose, one hand clutching a small, distinct object that had been completely painted over in the final version. The implications rippled through the room like a silent shockwave. Next, the X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy was activated, a non-invasive method that analyzes elemental composition, identifying specific pigments and their distribution. This was crucial for distinguishing original materials from later restorations and, more importantly, for detecting any hidden elements beneath the visible paint layers. As the XRF scanner traversed the canvas, a peculiar anomaly registered in the region where the infrared had hinted at a concealed object. A faint yet undeniable concentration of a specific metallic element, distinct from the surrounding pigments, began to glow on the elemental map. It was small, almost insignificant at first glance, but its presence was irrefutable evidence of a foreign object deliberately obscured. The data streamed in, processed by algorithms designed to filter out noise and enhance the most subtle variations. Each pixel of information was a word, a sentence, in a language centuries old, finally being translated. Then came the multispectral imaging, a technique that captures light across a vast range of wavelengths, from ultraviolet to far infrared, creating a layered spectral fingerprint of the artwork. This allowed Dr. Reed's team to differentiate between various layers of paint, varnish, and even the subtle chemical changes that occur over time. It was during this phase, as the composite images began to form, that the central event of the story truly exploded into undeniable view. On one particular spectral band, a faint, almost translucent layer emerged beneath the final portrait, revealing not just the outline of the hidden object in the subject's hand, but its undeniable form, a small, intricately carved signet ring, and within the ring, a symbol. Not a generic crest, but a very specific, almost rebellious emblem associated with a minor, historically suppressed noble house, one known for its fervent opposition to the ruling powers of the era. The room fell into a profound silence, broken only by the soft whirring of the machines. The shocking revelation was not merely the existence of the ring, but what it signified. The subject of the portrait, long believed to be a loyal courtesan or a minor dignitary, was in fact a clandestine supporter, perhaps even a direct member of this dissident faction. The artist, celebrated for their patronage by the very establishment this faction opposed, had deliberately painted over this critical detail, transforming a symbol of defiance into an innocuous, even submissive pose. This was an act of profound artistic and historical subterfuge, a silent protest, or a desperate concealment, depending on the artist's true allegiance. The detail fundamentally altered the trajectory of the portrait's emotional and historical narrative, shifting its entire context. The demure expression, once interpreted as gentle obedience, now seemed to carry a weight of hidden knowledge, a silent defiance beneath a veneer of conformity. This was the final betrayal, not by a person in the present, but by history itself, which had been unknowingly misleading for centuries. The portrait, once a steadfast symbol of an era's established order, now revealed itself to be a testament to hidden dissent, a coded message from a forgotten struggle. The artist's extreme decision to conceal the detail, painting over the signet ring with such meticulous care that it remained invisible to the naked eye and even to earlier, less advanced forms of analysis, was a desperate act of self-preservation or a profound statement of loyalty. And the surprising action of the narrator, Dr. Reed, and her team, to uncover it, culminated in a moment of undeniable truth. Their persistence, their refusal to accept the surface narrative, had peeled back layers of time and deception. The discovery was presented as irrefutable scientific evidence. The multispectral data, the XRF elemental maps, the infrared reflectography underdrawings, all converged to tell a consistent, unambiguous story. There was no room for doubt about its authenticity or its implications. The signet ring, the hidden symbol, the altered posture, all pointed to a deliberate act of concealment that had reshaped the portrait's meaning, twisting its true narrative into something palatable for the powerful. The subject was not who history claimed. The artist's intention was not what art historians had assumed. The entire edifice of understanding built around this masterpiece crumbled, replaced by a stark, verifiable truth. The invisible detail, once a whisper, was now a shout, echoing through the hallowed halls of art history, demanding a complete reevaluation. The portrait, for the first time in over 500 years, was truly seen. Its secret, held captive for so long, was finally free. The implications for Part 8 are massive. The revelation, once a closely guarded secret within the sterile confines of the lab, erupted into the global consciousness with the force of a seismic event. The scientific papers, meticulously peer-reviewed and published in leading journals, laid bare the irrefutable evidence. Multispectral imaging, X-ray fluorescence, and infrared reflectography had not merely suggested. They had definitively proven the existence of the hidden detail, the artist's deliberate alteration, the concealed truth. The initial public announcement, delivered with Dr. Reed's characteristic blend of gravitas and understated excitement, sent shockwaves through the art world and beyond. The consequence promised in Part 1, the complete and utter transformation of the portrait's meaning, was now fully revealed and embraced, reshaping its place in art history and public consciousness forever. Museums across the globe, custodians of countless masterpieces, began the painstaking process of reevaluating their collections. The iconic portrait, once displayed with a specific centuries-old narrative, was now subject to immediate relabeling. Explanatory plaques were updated, digital guides revised, and audio tours rewritten to reflect the astonishing new understanding. Textbooks, the very foundations of art historical education, were slated for urgent revisions, their pages soon to bear the weight of a newly discovered truth. New exhibitions were swiftly planned, not only to showcase the portrait in its revised context, but also to explore the groundbreaking scientific methodologies that had unveiled its secrets. Documentaries, quick to grasp the dramatic human and historical implications, began production, eager to tell the story of the invisible detail that had rewritten history. The long-held incorrect interpretation, the silent antagonist of this narrative, faced its moral and social fall. It was not a sudden, violent collapse, but a gradual, undeniable erosion of credibility. While a few staunch traditionalists initially clung to the old narrative, their voices became increasingly isolated against the overwhelming tide of scientifically validated evidence. The elegant, precise scans and irrefutable data rendered their arguments obsolete, reducing them to echoes of a bygone era. The consensus shifted, slowly at first, then with accelerating momentum, until the scientifically validated truth became the new, accepted reality. The portrait, once believed to depict a figure of stoic virtue, now revealed a narrative of defiance, of hidden allegiances, or perhaps even a profound personal tragedy deliberately veiled from public scrutiny. The implications rippled through historical studies, challenging assumptions about the period, the artist's patrons, and the socio-political climate that might have necessitated such an elaborate concealment. Dr. Reed and her research team, the tireless narrators of this unfolding truth, achieved a profound desfecho de justicia emocional, a justice rooted in historical accuracy and intellectual integrity. Their years of painstaking work, the countless hours spent in the lab, the battles against skepticism, and the personal sacrifices were all vindicated. They were recognized globally for their groundbreaking contribution, not merely as scientists, but as custodians of history, individuals who had pushed the boundaries of human knowledge to reveal a deeper, richer understanding of our past. Accolades poured in, not just from the scientific community, but from the broader public, captivated by the story of how an unseen detail could unravel centuries of misconception. Their work became a beacon, illuminating the path for future interdisciplinary research, demonstrating the symbiotic power of art and science working in harmony. The portrait itself, now understood in its true context, gained a new, almost breathtaking layer of depth and intrigue. It was no longer a static relic of the past, but a vibrant, dynamic testament to the artist's ingenuity, their courage, and their profound desire to communicate a truth that transcended their own time. It became a symbol not just of art's enduring beauty, but of the ongoing relentless quest for truth, demonstrating how cutting-edge science could unlock hidden dimensions of human expression. The subtle brush strokes, the play of light and shadow, the subject's enigmatic gaze, all took on new meaning, imbued with the weight of the story now fully uncovered. Viewers no longer merely observed. They engaged in a silent dialogue with the past, deciphering the artist's coded message, understanding the monumental risk taken to preserve an essential truth. This narrative, from the initial, almost imperceptible anomaly detected in the lab, to the dramatic overhaul of historical understanding, culminated in a profound, intimate reflection on the very nature of truth itself. It underscored the power of persistent inquiry, the unwavering commitment required to peel back layers of time and assumption, and the enduring capacity of art to surprise and challenge our perceptions. The journey of discovery was a testament to human curiosity, to the relentless pursuit of knowledge, and to the courage to question what has long been accepted. The portrait, once a quiet masterpiece, now stood as a vibrant, living document, a testament to the fact that even the most enduring narratives can hold secrets, waiting patiently for the right minds and the right tools to bring them to light. It left the viewer in thoughtful silence, contemplating the profound implications of an invisible detail that had, in the end, changed absolutely everything.